Hey guys, it's Friction here, Tank12, however you wanna call me, I don't really care, and welcome back to World of Tanks. Today we're going to have another premium tank review. This time around, it's a really juicy heavy tank. It's the M6A2E1. Now, a lot of you guys probably will know this tank as the Mutant M6, and it used to be one of the rarest premium tanks in World of Tanks, because the origin of this vehicle is that Wargaming actually did release it as a bundle when this tank, when the game was in the closed beta phase. People were able to buy themselves into the closed beta by purchasing the M6A2E1 and I think a little bit of gold currency to go with the vehicle. And that's how a lot of people, the original players, did receive this tank. They never sold it again, and I can already assure you guys, I did not get this tank at the very beginning. They never sold it again until the year 2015. In the year 2015 or 16, I think one of the 2 years, they did sell this tank for a very short period of time. I did pick it up because it's a rare collector's item, and I really wanted to get my hands on it, because when I started playing World of Tanks, this used to be one of the craziest opponents to go up against at tier 8. And yes, this tank no longer fits into the game as it used to fit into World of Tanks all those years ago. It has certainly lost a lot of its charm. It's a massive M6, and I think anyone who has driven an M6 will already know that that is not going to be a good thing, but it still has some quite interesting features. It's still a very cool looking tank in my opinion, also with the geese skin that we have right here with all of these different geeses. All of the different geese on the tank, as you can see. It looks really nice, and it's a massive tank. So before we go into all the characteristics, taking a look at all the stats, let's just take a real fast look at the outwards appearance of this vehicle. Now the M6, the Mutant M6, I think was, at least the hull, the M6 heavy tank, which is in the American tech tree, as we can check right here, the M6 right here, was actually built. This vehicle was built, and that's basically the chassis they used for the M6A2E1. I highly doubt that they ever built this one, but we can actually take a look at the development. So the M6A2E1 was a further development of the T1 and M6 heavy tanks. Developed in August 1944, the vehicle had a larger turret and the 105mm gun. Never saw mass production. So I'm not really sure if they built a vehicle. I do recall seeing a picture of it, but I'm not really sure if it was just of the M6 or if it was of the M6A2E1. But either way, it is in World of Tanks. And will they sell this tank again? Probably not. Maybe. I don't think so. But is it really worth it? Well, that's what we're here to find out. You can see this tank is really, really large. The very first thing you notice is its huge profile. That means its huge side profile. It's very, very long. It's very, very tall. Thus, it is really difficult to actually hide this behemoth somewhere behind bushes or behind a building. I mean, a lot of things you can just look right over. Like, imagine right here, you have a lot of tanks that you can just shoot over, and like most of the structures right here are actually so low that you can just fire above them with this tank. Is that a good or a bad thing? Well, it depends on the situation, as always. But yeah, this tank, I mean, it looks just this. The looks are absolutely crazy. If you just look at this tank, it just doesn't feel like it should be a vehicle. It doesn't feel like a real tank, because who would think that a massive tank, like a massive long hull, a massive turret on top, would make a good vehicle? But they built the TOG one, so I'm not going to be judging. Not going to be judging the M6A2E1. But I don't really think it's a great vehicle, at least design-wise already. If it is a great vehicle, we'll find out in the categories right now. So you have a 105mm gun, a 105mm T50 or T5E1E gun, which is unique to this vehicle, but it is actually quite similar to the T32's 105mm gun. So you have the M6A2E1 D4 turret, which, as you can see, is quite massive on the vehicle itself. So let's take a look at the characteristics. Before we do that, though, just one real quick disclaimer. The crew on this vehicle is really good. It's my T110E5 crew and my T34 crew. At least one crew member of the T34. So yeah, the crew here is really, really good. So yeah, this vehicle is going to be having the best possible kind of foundation to perform really well in the games. So let's take a look at the 105mm gun. It has a 320 alpha damage, so that's basically average. If you have a 105mm gun, especially on an American tank, you have 204mm of penetration, which is also average at tier 8. This tank is going to be doing quite well. At tier 9, it's still going to be doing okay. You are not going to be facing any tier 10 tanks because this is one of the original premium tanks with preferential matchmaking. Probably the very first tank that they introduced with preferential matchmaking in mind. So yeah, the reload time, at least the reload time on my vehicle, since I do have some of the equipment on this tank, is 10.03 seconds. The turret traverse is terrible, 24.53 degrees per second, 10 degrees of gun depression, 20 degrees of gun elevation. Yeah, the gun depression is great. This tank is just really high up there, you know, so you need the gun depression, and it doesn't feel like it's 10 degrees because the vehicle is just so high. But still, you can make it work. It's just, I'd say it feels like 8 degrees of gun depression because of the height of the tank. Then the aim time is fairly good, 1.79 seconds for a fully aimed in reticle. The problem is just the dispersion isn't really working with you. 0.38 dispersion at 100 meters is not something I would call a lethal sniper, but it's a heavy tank, so yeah, at medium, close ranges, you're not going to be having too many issues. At longer distances, well, we're talking about a bit of a different story there. Now also, the DPM isn't the greatest. 1.9k, 1914 damage per minute. Well, it's not going to be, you know, uprooting trees with that damage, but yeah, it's a heavy tank. No, not a lot you can do. You can put on some equipment, maybe even premium consumables, but it's a premium tank. You don't want to spend extra additional credits right there, you know. So I have 1,710 HP, which in usual terms would be 1550, so 1,550 HP. I do have the hardened equipment on this, improved hardening, and that will give me additional 160 HP. That's why I have 1,710. So now we are going to get to the biggest issue of this tank, and it is obviously its armor. Now the hull is based on an M6 tank. Now the M6, if we do compare the hull real fast, since the hull even in stock is not that different. Well, I mean, it's going to be different characteristics, but if we just talk about the hull, you cannot upgrade the hull on any tank. So the hull on the M6, the original, is 102 millimeters thick, 52 on the side and 46 on the rear. Now with the M6A2E1, or I'm just going to call it the mutant M6 from now on, you get actually 191 millimeters at the front. You get 66 on the rear and 51 at the back. So yeah, the armor is really similar, at least from the side and the back, but the front has been improved by a very, very large amount. So you have 191 millimeters of additional armor at the front. Well, at tier 10 with the angling, no, not at tier 10, at tier 8 with the angling, you are actually going to be able to still bounce a couple of shots. It's actually not too bad at shot stopping certain tier 8 vehicles. But since a lot of tanks now at tier 8 have penetration rates of up to over like 250, and are like on a level on tier 9 to tier 10 stats from time to time, well, the armor is going to be having a bit of an issue. Especially those cheeks on the side, they're a bit angled, but you know, if you're really unlucky and you're angling your tank, they're just going to be able to go right through the cheeks. So there are things that you have to be really aware of when you're playing this tank. Now, obviously, an option would be going hull down. Now, you have the massive turret, you have armor on the turret, but we'll talk about that in just a second. Now, the frontal plate is also angled quite nicely. It is a bit flat from certain angles, so if you're right in front of it and you can aim down at the hull, which I think quite a few tanks will be able to do, and it's like really flat and it's not angled, you're going to be able to go right through it, I think, with certain tanks. But it's not going to be a guaranteed pen with every single vehicle. It does hold up in certain scenarios, but it doesn't do very well in others. The big problem is just, you know, this tank, as you can see right here, the tracks are massive. These are like 4 tracks bound together in like two in duo combination, so 2 on 2. And you can actually see that if you have your vehicle at an angle, those tracks do go quite far out, and they do actually not count as you know, the hull. But if you go a little bit further to the back, it actually counts as the hull right here. So yeah, the tracks are a bit too far out in my opinion. Like, I think they're exposed a little bit too much. But then we're coming to the very nice part, to the turret. The turret has 229 millimeters at the front, 89 on the side, and 208 at the back. Now, this is a really weird combination because you have a really strong front-facing turret, then you have a really weird weak side, and then you have a strong back part of the turret. So there are going to be bounces on this tank that are going to be really weird. And then there are going to be some pens on the side of the turret that are going to be like really awkward. Like, you're going to have a lot of awkward situations with this tank. The gun mantlet is probably going to be the thickest part at the front. The issue that you have right here is just that you can see that this part right here and the part right here next to the turret, or next to the gun mantlet, they're actually really flat. And you can actually overmatch them and go right through. And that has happened quite a couple of times to me in even tier 8 battles. Now, the other thing is your gun ring, or the turret ring that combines with the hull, is actually quite a big weak spot as well. You can fire in between there, and also it's quite a large target because like the gun mantlet doesn't really cover the part down below. So this is actually going to be a weak spot as well. If you're turning your turret just a little bit, that's going to be a major weak spot. Your top part right here, do you see this angled side, is going to be an issue as well if somebody is in front of you. That's not going to be an issue if they are like a lot smaller than you, but if they are on like higher ground, or they're on even ground and they are almost as tall as you, although I don't really know which tank that would be, they are going to be able to go right through there. This part right here with the viewport and actually the commander's hatch on top, those are weak spots as well, so you have to work with them. So overall, this is a tank that has, on paper, great survivability, but there are a lot of weight. There are a lot of, how do you call them? There are a lot of butts to it. So every single aspect to the armor usually has a con to it with this tank. So you're never going to be really able to fully use the vehicle very effectively, because there's always going to be one downside of the armor that just might spit in your soup, and that usually will end up ruining your game a little bit. So yeah, just to point that out. So the armor is not as reliable as it does look on paper. Moving on to mobility. This tank is not very fast. It has a top speed of 29 kilometers per hour, 14 kilometers per hour in reverse, 33.19 degrees per second turn time, so this tank doesn't turn very fast. Don't forget, the turret rotation speed is also really slow. It's a heavy tank, it's sluggish, it's an old American heavy tank, it's really tall, it's a big target, and with the speed, with the survivability, you can see that there's some obvious issues when you're playing the M6A2E1. I'm really glad that this tank has preferential matchmaking. The issue is just that this tank isn't too bad. It's not that this tank is horrible. It's just that a lot of other tier 8 vehicles are much better than it, and that makes it a bit of a hard vehicle to play in certain situations. Even if you're going up against tier 8 vehicles that are like on par with you or should be on par with you, you're going to have quite a bit of a hard time going through them and, being competitive with other tier 8 vehicles. God forbid certain tier 8 premium tanks. So the spotting, I think the view range, standard view range is 380 meters. We're not going to be talking about concealment. Since it's a heavy tank. Now we can take a look at the premium ammunition. The premium ammo has a top pen of 245 millimeters of pen. It's an APCR shell with an okay shell velocity of 1,181 meters per second, but it's not going to be cutting the chase if you're going up against certain tier 9 vehicles. But still, 245 should give you an edge with certain tier 8 vehicles. With certain tier 9s, it's already like on the edge of maybe not being very effective. So yeah, all in all, this is a tank that just combines a lot of things that used to be really good at the very start of the journey, at the very start of World Tanks. It used to be really strong, especially with the lower plate. The hull armor was really strong at the front, and then the turret as well. People had like issues going through the turret or facing this tank from the front. Now I think it is no longer as much of a threat because people are spending a lot more gold when they're shooting you, and people are, just a bit more experienced where to shoot tanks. And I think they just know that the Mutant M6 is not really that much of danger. One of the big issues is just that the rate of fire with 10.03 seconds real time isn't as great if you are a frontline warrior and you don't have decent rate of fire with, good enough damage per minute, or maybe a very above average damage output. You're going to have a bit of a problem. So you have to rely on your armor, and relying on your armor is just not going to be cutting the chase. So this tank has kind of grown more into a support role vehicle, which is out there to support you from, to support a push. It's not going to be the main player, at least when you're playing against tier 8s and 9 opponents. It's a complete different playstyle when you're going up against tier 7 vehicles and tier 6 tanks, because that's where you can really utilize the armor and where this tank really does shine. And I think, well, that's what you expect of a tier 8 vehicle going down 2 or 1 tier. So yeah, I'd say without further ado, let's take a look at the gameplay, and possibly 2 gameplays, depending on what I think will fit best to really show off the tank without making it too long. And hopefully we can have a verdict on what I think about the Mutant M6. So we're gonna have 2 games today to show off what the M6A2E1 is capable of and what its limitations are. So the very first game, we're going up against the worst kind of scenario, and that is when you're playing against a couple of tier 9 vehicles. This tank, its armor is a bit trollish. It is a bit weird. Like at distance, the armor works quite well, but up close range, I think it kind of disintegrates really, really quickly. The tank isn't very fast, but at least it's able to reach the 29 kilometers per hour top speed mark, well, in a, let's say, adequate time. The gun is a bit weird because, as we already mentioned previously, the aim time is pretty good, but the dispersion isn't very good. Other than that, you have 202 millimeters of pen. If you're using the premium shells, you have 245 millimeters of APCR penetration, and I think you can make it work with this vehicle. It's very large. That sometimes is definitely a pro. We're going to look at another game just after this, where we can actually take a look at that height difference and how that bigger profile can give you an advantage in certain situations, but also how it can be a bit of an issue because you're a huge target. You're massive. Artillery will love shooting you. When you get spotted somewhere, everyone will be shooting you because your tank is just that massive. So we are going to go down here. We're playing on Mannerheim line, by the way, and we're gonna go down to the heavy tank alley. I just want to get a quick shot off and see if we can snipe some vehicles if there is a scout already sitting in that bush. That's something that I would highly advise for anyone when they're playing this map. You know, get some people to snipe into that alleyway, because the heavy tanks usually will drive into that corridor, and you'll be able to get some free shots off if you have somebody spotting there. So yeah, we're facing a T-28, we're facing a Bisonte C-45, and there are quite a few tanks over there. Like there's a T-49 coming in, there's an E-75 down there, Carnarvon, Carnarvon, Action 10, and we have 2 vehicles that are completely on their own, or 3 vehicles, but I think one of them will get taken out in a second. So we kind of see this as a chance. We have to do something. We'll have to step in, and we have to do some damage here and assist this one heavy tank remaining. So we take out the Bisonte C-45 because he was low HP, and we want to get the kill. We want to be sure that there are less tanks down there, less guns firing at us. Get another shot off at the defender, and what you can see right here is the reload time. Well, those 10 seconds aren't as amazing. If I were in another tank, a Löwe for example, maybe not a Löwe, but if I were in let's say in a Bisonte, maybe in a Tiger 2, I would have been able to do a lot more damage because of the rate of fire, but still we managed to do a bit of damage, and we bounced quite a few shots as well. The only problem is, well, if they know where to shoot your tank and you're in close quarter combat, well, they're going to be firing, and they're going to be able to go through. And that's what they did twice on the turret. That's exactly what they did. The turret is a bit of a weak spot, as I already mentioned, if you know how to play, or if you know how to engage vehicles with a lot of the frontal turret armor. But the turret can be really, really strong if you can keep your distance and you can keep them to your front. The thing is, as I already mentioned, this area right here is rather flat, and this area as well. That's why a lot of people will be able to actually deal damage right there and actually penetrate you. But still, we did manage to bounce 1,580 damage. So that's pretty damn good. But you can see we are a main target, main attraction for artillery right there, because we're a huge tank. We're a really big target, and if you do get hit, it's going to hurt, because you have an M6 hull, which is basically a tier 6 hull, well, with a mutant turret on top of it, playing at tier 8. But the hull at the front, it did work, and it did hold up. Right there you can see that the tracks are a bit awkward, because the tracks are like poking outwards quite a lot, but you can see that if you're at the wrong angle, people will be able to pen your front plate, but they need to be aiming downwards at you, and this angle makes it quite interesting in certain scenarios, because if they're firing at you from the front and they're like below you, which a lot of tanks will be, they will actually bounce off the upper plate. And the lower plate is also quite strong if you think about it as well. But still, we managed to push through. We had almost 2k damage bounced, and we almost did 2k damage. The thing is just the rate of fire is not that great. The mobility on the vehicle is okay, but it's not great either. It just screams of old world tanks, because it has a lot of downsides, but it also has a lot of upsides. And it kind of balances it out, and I think it is a very well balanced vehicle at tier 8, at least well, at least as long as the opponents don't really know how to engage this vehicle. Now the Mutant M6, it just doesn't appear a lot of times on the battlefield, because not a lot of people own this vehicle, and a lot of people that owned this tank or still own it probably stopped playing World of Tanks a long time ago. I think there are not a lot of players left playing this tank very actively. So obviously, if you are engaging one of these vehicles, you'll need to learn how to take it out, because it does have a certain certain strong suits, which is the armor in certain areas, but it can be quite easily taken out of the game if you do know what you're doing. You just need to know the weak spots, as I mentioned previously. So obviously the side turret right here, and this part right here is going to be a weak spot as well. The cupola on top. Then depending on what angle you have, you can see we've bounced a couple of shots right here. Like we've bounced one here, we bounced one here, we bounced one here. That's because we were above them and they were shooting at us from below. And with the angle that we had, it was basically impossible to go through our upper plate. But if you have an angle, you can go right through here. This tank doesn't have a lot of side armor, so it's a sluggish tank. You can still take it out, but from the front, it still is quite well armored in today's game. It just has certain weak spots that are quite easy to take care of, like the turret ring right here. If you have enough pen, you can go through the turret ring as well. So I'd say without further ado, let's jump to the next battle and see what you can do with this tank, with its height difference, and where its limitations are on the battlefield. Okay, so the second game that we're going to be taking a look at is actually in a tier 8 matchup. Some of these tier 8s are actually more dangerous than some of the tier 9s that we faced previously. Most definitely the tank destroyers, the SU-130PM, the Scorpion G, the STRV-S1, the T-28 prototype, and the Rheinmetall Borsig Waffenträger. These vehicles all possess some really high caliber guns that can easily punch through any kind of armor. The thing is, we're playing on Ghost Town. This map is played as following, at least as what I've noticed is medium tanks do like to spend their time on the 1-2 line. Tank destroyers like to camp behind on the K or J line and on the A and B line. They do sometimes go to the very far edges of those lines, but tank destroyers usually don't go out too far on this map. And the 9, 8, 9, and 0 line usually, well, it's kind of a free-for-all, depends. Sometimes medium tanks go in there, sometimes light tanks go in there, but there are a few times where nobody is really playing that zone very actively. It's going to be important for the later part of the game. We're playing a heavy tank, so we're going into the town because there's also an artillery piece and we want to see what we can do right here. Now, against the defender, this tank is not going to be very effective. Not a lot of tanks will be effective against the defender at tier 8 because that thing has a ridiculous armor and should not be considered a standard tier 8 vehicle. But luckily for us, the defender is kind of busy with getting spotted by our light tank, and I think the defender is also a prime target for artillery right there. So the M6, I mean, the accuracy is not the best, but I'd say the close quarter engagement right here, or close quarter area, is probably where this tank can shine the most, especially if you can hide your hull behind rubble like this. This tank is very, very large. You can see its profile is very, very big. And that's one of the scenarios where you can really use that profile to your advantage. Let me just take the free cam. There's an IS-3A, a Centurion 5.1, and an IS-3 over there. So right here, with this rubble, we have basically protected our complete hull except for the turret on top. Now, if you don't see this tank coming out a lot on the battlefield, you will have a bit of a problem being able to engage this tank. But if you shoot this area over here, or any of these side parts right next to the gun mantlet, you're going to be having I wouldn't say it's an easy time to go through, but you have a much better chance of being able to penetrate this tank. Also, if I do go a bit too far out, it's an M6 hull, it's very long, it's quite an easy target. So if somebody catches me outside, out of cover, well, it's an easy way to do some serious damage, because our rate of fire with 10 seconds reload time for a single shell is not that great, especially considering our alpha damage is 320 and our pen is 204 millimeters. Now, the 204 millimeters are certainly good enough against tier 8 vehicles, but you know, against these Soviet vehicles, you have to be a bit more tricky. So right there, we bounce a shot from the IS-3A and I'm looking. Oh yeah, it's right there next to my gun mantlet, and I fired, but I didn't pen the IS-3A, I think. So the thing is, with this tank, in close quarter combat, when you are facing these kind of vehicles, well, hull down, it's just basically a shoot off because we're engaging each other. But I decide to move in, and right there, accuracy, and I get a little bit lucky. High roll, 378 damage, and I manage to pen and destroy his engine and set him on fire. Unfortunately for me, I'm a bit too cocky right there, and we can take the free cam real fast. There's a Progetto 46 back there, and he's using just that alleyway right there. He can fire through that, unfortunately for us. And he's hitting us on the side, and that's exactly one of the big issues that you have when you're playing this tank. If there are several vehicles that are engaging you and they're on the left and on the right, you're not going to be able to handle all of them, and your armor is not going to be holding up. So right here, he actually penetrated our side turret, which is only 80 millimeters thick, and then the IS-3A was able to shoot right here on the side of our vehicle. But luckily for us, one of them actually bounced the turret ring. It's a bit weird. It's a weird shot. I'm not sure if it bounced off the armor, the upper plate, and then to the turret ring, because there's also a hit on the armor. But yeah, you can see that the armor can work in your favor. But I'm trying to fall back right here. The IS-3A is coming in for a bit more, and I noticed that if I want to stay alive, I have to fall back. Now we have managed to get quite a bit of assistance damage. Unfortunately, right there, the aim time, the dispersion, well, the aim time is decent, but the dispersion is just not very good. We managed to do almost 2k damage combined, and we've bounced quite a bit of damage, but you can see you can lose HP very easily on this vehicle. There is a defender. Now, the defender is going to be a tough nut to crack. Shooting the lower plate with standard ammo is not going to be possible. He bounces off our turret somewhere. He actually bounces off our cupola because that hit was right on top. That was right on the cupola, but unfortunately for him, he bounces. So I do load APCR to be able to engage the defender. Now the defender is not going to do that mistake twice, and he's going to be able to hit that one with a premium APCR shell. Now, as soon as people load premium shells, well, your tank is basically gone, because the premium shells usually have more than enough pen to deal with your upper plate even, and your lower plate, and anything on the turret, right, especially right here. So this tank is a bit awkward in scenarios where people do sling a lot of gold shells towards you. I'm trying to bait this defender, or I'm just trying to keep him in place so that the Carnarvon on the back can actually, the Carnarvon, okay, I'm going to call it the Carnarvon from now on, that he's going to be moving in. Unfortunately, the defender is quite a smart player, and he decides to move up, and we do bounce his lower plate. We're just trying to hide because we know that he's going to be able to penetrate our lower plate if he just manages to get a shot off, and luckily for us, he decides to fire. And that's one of the things you can do with a defender if you're this tall. Well, you can shoot him right there. And yeah, that's the thing that you can do with tall tanks. Unfortunately for me, I completely forget that this is an IS-3A. I put a terrible shot into his pike, and I do get the damage without getting the kill. Now, unfortunately for me, my aim is not really great. I do get the track shot though, and we manage to get the assistance damage. But yeah, you can see as soon as people are loading the premium shells, your vehicle is going to suffer quite a bit. But I think so far I haven't been, like, there are certain games where you get steamrolled when you're playing this tank, especially when you're facing several opponents at once, and they're like in front of you and they have several angles at you. But I think that's the thing that will happen with any kind of tank. But it just doesn't, I don't know, it just feels like if you shoot this tank and you have a weak spot of this vehicle, it's going to be doing damage. And if you think about that, it's actually a good thing, because that's how World of Tanks should be like, at least in my opinion. Because if you have a weak spot, it should be exploited, and you should be able to exploit it, and you should be, rewarded for knowing about the weak spot. So we're moving in right here. There are a couple of tank destroyers. I'm a bit afraid that somebody might spot me and Artie will get the kill shot. I do spot the artillery. I am able to do some damage right here, and as I mentioned already, the accuracy of this tank is not perfect. And we unfortunately miss the SU-130PM, and thus any kind of chance to deal any damage to the SU-130PM, because he's just waiting for the Lansen C on the other side, because he's able to proxy spot him. The thing is, the tank destroyers, they obviously don't have any view range here. I don't think any one of them is running any optics. They're scared now. They're scared. I hit the Scorpion G for 330. I hoped for a bit of a better roll. I load high explosive, and unfortunately, I did miscalculate it by about 1 second. The Scorpion G does take us out with a high explosive shell, and he manages to kill us in the end. But still, it was a decent game. 2,000 damage done, 780 damage blocked, and 1,600 assisted damage. Now, the thing is, the M6, I think we can give it a bit of a verdict now. The M6 still is a bit of a tricky vehicle, in my opinion. We have to go back in time just to be able to actually fly the camera, because that would be really nice, where we can show off the tank in its full beauty. So the M6, the Mutant M6, I haven't played as many games as I have played in the T-34 or the Löwe or the KV-5. This tank I did get about 6 years ago, and when it came out, because I was a avid tank collector, I no longer am a big tank collector no more. It has some certain weak spots and some certain problems. The gun handling isn't the greatest. Its mobility isn't the greatest. The armor is actually on paper really good, but in action it can be a bit weird. I've had certain games against certain vehicle types where I was completely annihilated very, very quickly, and in other games, as you can see in the last two ones, where the armor was quite resilient. And those games were, I mean, you will not have games like that every single round. I think what's really important with this tank is that you do not overextend. You cannot be engaging several tanks at the same time in front of you, because as soon as you turn your turret, this already counts as side turret, right? Everything here is a side turret, and you can see we have caught 2 shells, and you only have 80 millimeters of side turret armor, and that's quite easy to overmatch, and it's easy to do damage to. Now also the hull is not very good at the sides, but the front is quite trollish, because obviously the angling is very interestingly done. But yeah, it also has these side cheeks, which a lot of people have ignored. I think these side cheeks are a bit easier to go through than the plate right here, because they're more you know, flat. And what's interesting is that a lot of people just haven't shot at these side cheeks right there. And I think the only tank that shot our turret was in the last game right here. I think a lot of people maybe tried to shoot the turret right here, but some of them shot my my gun mantlet, some of them shot right here and actually went through. The interesting part is I think a lot of people just don't know how to fight an M6, a Mutant M6, because this tank hasn't been around for a very long time now. A lot of people don't play the M6 anymore. So if you see one of these rare vehicles on the battlefield, I think a lot of people just either don't know how to take it out, or, well, it's just going to get swarmed from the side, or they just load heat or premium shells. With premium shells, this tank doesn't stand a chance. It's quite easy to go through, especially anything on the upper hull and on the turret with especially heat. This tank just becomes a massive target. It's a big target for artillery. Everybody loves shooting this tank, especially from behind. It's very, very weak. But I still think, does it have a place in World Tanks in the year 2021? Well, that depends. That depends. This is definitely an old premium tank that has preferential matchmaking. That's a huge plus, obviously. You will never be facing tier 10 vehicles, but at the same time, it feels like an old tank, you know. It feels like an old premium vehicle. the gun handling, everything is kind of balanced. Everything is okay, but nothing is like amazing. If I think about the King Tiger now that has just been upgraded, the King Tiger that has decent mobility now, that has really good pen, that has great gun handling, that has decent armor now as well. I just think that, vehicles such as the M6 and the KV5, they will never be able to have that kind of super like greatness that certain tanks have. And I think that's good, because that's how premium tanks should be. Premium tanks should be a bit worse than their standard counterparts. The thing is just that they have created so many premium tanks the last couple of years that have been so incredibly strong and above average strong, that anytime they try a balanced premium tank or a balanced design, that people just get absolutely upset. And I think this is an old kind of nod towards for history, for anyone who wants to see this vehicle or play it like how World of Tanks used to be a couple of years ago. This or how World of Tanks used to be 10 years ago, definitely. This is exactly a tank for it. I mean, even for back in the days, I'd say it's quite strong, but for today's standards, you can see that it definitely, like the power shift, there was a massive power shift in World of Tanks itself. So should you get it? Well, the thing is, are you a tank collector? This tank is not coming out anytime soon. I don't think they're going to be selling it in the next couple of years. I think maybe they'll sell it just before the game will come to an end, for all the people to collect it. I like my Mutant M6. I have enjoyed it quite a bit, and I plan on, keep on playing this vehicle. Oh, now on the earth. And yeah, I think for tank collectors, this is definitely a must. It's a rare vehicle. For anyone out there, if you want to have a competitive premium tank and it's your first premium tank, well, I think the T26E5, the Patriot tank is definitely a better option. But for anyone else out there, I mean, it isn't the worst tank. It isn't the worst premium tank. But either way, I hope you guys did enjoy this review. As always, comment, like, and subscribe below, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Until then, have a good one.